Hello, and welcome to the Rich Life Recipe Podcast. We are super excited for today's guest that is with us, Cara Brookins. Cara is a true trailblazer whose story proves that ordinary people can accomplish the extraordinary. Cara is an internationally acclaimed keynote speaker, #1 best-selling author of 9 books, and a renowned expert in the science of motivation. She's best known for building her own 3,500 square foot house with her 4 children using only YouTube tutorials. No construction experience required. Her story went viral, earning millions of views and capturing the attention of media outlets like the New York Times, The Today Show, CNN. Cara's life is a masterclass in overcoming insurmountable odds, and through her books, including Rise, How a House Built a Family, and Unstuck, end procrastination using the ancient psychology behind how-to videos. She empowers people worldwide to break through their limitations and thrive. Cara has worked with global companies such as Google, Walmart, and YouTube, as well as aced at events. And she's even partnered with the United Nations to promote sustainable development goals. Today, we'll dive deep into her unique approach to building a rich life, one that blends determination, curiosity, and a willingness to take risks. Please welcome Cara.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Jason. I'm excited to be here.
You're so welcome. We're so excited. I wanted to get all of that in there so they know who we're talking to today, because it's such an extraordinary story.
It's an unusual one for sure. I'm glad to be on the side of it that I am.
It's an amazing story. And I think when we started, Alicia sent me over, obviously, all the details about you and said, we have to have her on the show. I don't care what we do. I don't care how we have to move everything. We're getting her on the show. This is some information about it. And whoever's done your website has done a beautiful job because it feels like a story. It sort of takes you from one thing to the next thing to the next. And then, of course, there's social proof and there's all the amazing work you've done. And then it leads you suddenly to this moment where it's like, who am I? And like, what am I about? And I thought it was beautiful. It was brilliantly done. And I guess that leads me to the first question. Obviously, one of the things you do for revenue, for monetization, to allow you to support yourself and your beautiful family. And of course, this falls under our wealth pillar. As everyone knows who listens to the show, we have 3 pillars: wealth, health, and wisdom. What is the most asked for talk that you give? And why do you think it's the most popular?
Well, thank you first for the website compliments. Knowing me as much as you do already, you know that's a DIY, right?
I did not know that.
It is. But not just by me. My oldest daughter, who is an amazing expert in branding and strategy. And also, even though she does not do websites generally as a profession, she's really good at it.
Really good.
And she loves storytelling like I do. So yeah. So, and that leads right into the most asked for talks that I do are storytelling. Really early on, I was asked to just get up and tell the story of building the house. And I did that in a really just authentic way of standing on a stage and here's what we did, not having any idea how to do a more professional corporate keynote. But the more of those that I did, I get a really good understanding of the really strange ways that building a house with small children actually translates to what people are doing in a corporate environment. And the way that they're trying to lead a crazy team through chaos and uncertainty. That's what I was doing on the construction site, and taking on a massive goal that I didn't know how to achieve, that I wasn't sure I was going to succeed at, and pushing through until I reached the end, and with a high level of determination. So what I do on a stage is that I share that story. Generally, the main thing that people ask for is resilience and motivation. I do a lot of teamwork and leadership too, but they want that story of overcoming
hardship and working it out yourself. Yeah, there's a certain magic to that, right? This idea that you found a way to work it out. When I sent your stuff to a bunch of friends to ask what would they ask if they could ask you any question, what surprised me is, besides coming back with questions, and I've got some great questions from them, and I'll definitely ask you them. It was this idea of, wow, I mean, obviously I watch YouTube videos, but I never once thought they could make that much of a difference to anyone's life. So I think that's incredible.
Yeah, it's a mindset, right? That figure it out mindset, and that idea that I don't know how to do this yet. Give me a minute. I can figure it out. And keep in mind too, this is YouTube back in 2007. So
Wow.
we're talking YouTube before a smartphone. We didn't have an iPhone out here. We couldn't watch the videos on the construction site. We watched the videos back at the house, wrote notes on Post-it notes, and then we had to come out here and translate our own notes and literally just lay everything out and figure it out. Trial and error, doing it wrong 1,000 times and being willing to cut it apart and go again.
I cannot even imagine. And doing it under the pressure that you were under. I mean, I recently just put together a sideboard, and it took I want to say 3 hours, and then I didn't like it. I took it all apart and sent it back. So,
Oh, no.
I mean, I just can't imagine building a house. And I think for some of our guests who might not know the story, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about why you did it. What led to you and the kids taking this task and diving in and just go for it?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because it's not a sane thing to do. And it's not something that a normal person just jumps out and says, today I think my children and I are going to build a house from the ground up. My kids and I had been through really, really difficult times. I was in a really bad domestic violence situation with a man who had schizophrenia. And in fact, by the time we started building the house, we had been divorced for many years, but he kept coming after us in really dangerous ways, really extreme ways, attacking our pets, coming to the house with weapons, tapping on the windows with knives, wearing crazy costumes. It just a ridiculous number of really horrifying things that we could not escape. And so we had gone through years and years of this sort of torment. We had moved many times trying to get away, but you can't hide, and I think we know more and more in the modern day, like you cannot get away, especially when you have children and a job. So we decided we needed to stand our ground. And we had moved enough times that I had been left pretty financially devastated, had a great job. I was a senior software architect and a systems analyst, and I wrote fiction books on the side. Wow. And so I decided we need a house. What can we do? There was this brand new website, YouTube. So I went there and I just started looking at cheap houses, not with the intent to build one, I should say, but right away the videos that popped up, that wicked algorithm that drags us into things. You guys know it's pulled you into something in life, right? And for me, it was, how to frame a window in a wall and how to set a foundation block. And it immediately, and I know how this sounds now, but at that time, in the set of circumstances I was in, it immediately seemed like the most logical, sane conclusion any woman would come to. That obviously my kids and I are going to build a house. We could afford the supplies. I could afford the 2x4s and the nails with a construction loan, but I couldn't afford the labor. It was one or the other. So that's what we did. That's how we went into it. So I think when you look at that type of a mindset, I didn't go into that like you did building your sideboard. Like you had the option to send it back, right? Like you could jump ship anytime you wanted. I needed a place to live. And I needed a project that would rebuild the confidence in not only myself, but in my children. I needed something that would heal us. I hadn't gone through this trauma alone. So we as a family needed to go through a healing process alone together. So that's what we did. We took a vote. It was kind of a democratic process, although I have to say, I was like, so do you want to buy a really small broken down house? You guys can share bedrooms and we'll fix it up. Or do you want to just buy all the stuff, the nails and the 2x4s, and if we put it together yourself, you can each have your own bedroom.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was easy. They voted for the house.
I love
I
it.
like how you positioned it.
Yeah, I was going to say your way of proposing that was absolutely stellar. There's a gorgeous quote by Michael Lee Nelson that I always think of because I think that it defines my life, which is desperation is the father of invention.
Yes.
I think people forget what you can accomplish if you are desperate to have something or a new experience, a new life, a new version of yourself.
And to stop running.
Right. And to stop running. But, I think in some ways we're all running away from something, some past life, something that we don't like about our current situation. And if we can be running away from something and running towards something with the same amount of energy and enthusiasm at the same time, that's where we hit the really big things. And while there's a certain amount of romanticism around overcoming trauma and how like that desperation leads us to big things, it doesn't have to be that, right? Like
Agreed.
we can set up that same scenario in our mind anytime we want by giving ourselves a massive goal, not giving ourselves a plan B. There's no way out, and giving ourselves a tight deadline. So we can set up that same kind of, okay, this is a tight deadline emergency scenario. I have to reach this goal by this time. We can set that up for ourselves. And I mean, essentially that's what I did with the house, right? There was no, we didn't have to build a house. There were other options, but I set up that sense of urgency by we got a construction loan that had a 9-month deadline. So I had 9 months to build a house or we lost everything.
Wow.
So, we had that deadline, that ticking time bomb that's sitting there. And I think that it's so essential that we do that with our own goals, that we set that tight deadline, that we set that massive goal. We could have built a little cabin. We built a 2-story, 3,500 square foot, 5-bedroom, 3-bath house with a 3-car garage.
Wow.
And that's partially because the kids were helping draw the blueprint. They were like, a little bigger, a little more. And it looks small on paper. We drew the blueprint ourselves. It looks a lot smaller on paper than when you start constructing it in 3D.
I have to ask, your experience building a house with your children, it demonstrates the power of working together on tangible projects. How did you see your relationships with your children strengthen through this shared hands-on experience?
Oh, that is one of my favorite things, not just from a psychological perspective or a family perspective, the way that we changed and grew, but how I later came to understand it. So first, what happened is on the construction site, when we first started, we were a close family at the time. We thought we were a close family, right? But when you go through trauma, people want to imagine you all pull closer together when the reality is you don't. Everyone tucks tight inside themselves, right? You're in this sort of, high defense mode. So you're not as close. The kids have straight A's, their rooms are clean, but we don't have this clean, healthy line of communication that we ought to. But you drop a bunch of people onto a construction site with no TV, no smartphones. We are just out here literally in the mud, having to figure out how to do things. Very, very quickly, you learn how to communicate. From a standpoint of what tool you need next, or how do we do this, or, that was a really dumb idea. And you have to be able to take, yeah, you're right. That was a really bad idea. Never listen to me again. You learn to laugh first at what's happening, and then you learn to laugh at yourselves. And that's a big deal, that not taking yourself so seriously, because our life had been so serious for so long that we didn't laugh at ourselves. That self-deprecating humor, once we could laugh at ourselves, I knew we were healing. And then from a post-build, psychological perspective, neurological perspective, what I came to understand is really through pure dumb luck. I chose a project that created the perfect neurological environment for team bonding. Perfect. I mean, the things that release, oxytocin is the hormone that creates bonding, that kind of cuddle, love, bonding experience that we have between friends, between family, between mother and child. That all comes from the hormone oxytocin. Well, some of the things that cause oxytocin to release are that figuring it out together. Anytime you're thrown into a scenario where you have to talk about something and figure it out, it releases oxytocin in your brain. That physical workout, physically doing things, releases oxytocin. That hand-to-hand work where you're touching each other, where you're touching the same tools and touching the same equipment, that releases oxytocin. So having deadlines, repeated like short deadlines where you have to achieve something, which releases dopamine in your brain. When you're doing that as a group, it releases oxytocin. So we were literally, every single activity that we did on this construction site was designed to create a team bond, which it did in absolutely incredible ways.
I have a follow-up question, if it's okay, Alicia.
Mm-hmm. Be my guest.
Many parents worry that they need special skills or expensive materials to meaningfully engage with their kids in a world of technology and smartphones and laptops and competing against the noise of the world. Yet you built an entire house using your children as crew. What would you say to parents who feel intimidated about doing hands-on projects with their kids?
Oh, for all the reasons I just described with oxytocin, it is the best thing that you can do. I mean, we look at these experiential things like I've got to take them to Disney World, which is outrageously expensive. And you're hardly interacting face to face, eye to eye, hand to hand with them at all, right? Like you're all looking outward. But if you can build something, make something, it doesn't have to be good. You know what I mean? Like my kids and I decided after we built the house, I had this idea that we should make like this massive concrete structure, like a statue in the front yard. And because my kids grew up building a house, they weren't like, well, no, we shouldn't do that. Or no, like, why don't we do something small? They were like, yeah, instead we could make it 10 feet tall. And like they're all like, egging me on and coming up with all of these ideas. So, and we did start small. We have like a 4-foot tall statue in the yard that we built. And it's like an Easter Island head that we made, but there we are, hand mixing this concrete mixture in a wheelbarrow. We're hand placing it onto this sculpture. We're making terrible moves and ripping it apart, and the laughter and the mess, all of that, like the bonding, the way that you talk to each other and interact, it's hands down better than any expensive device or experience you can take someone to. And I thought about that before we built the house. I came up with other ideas to bond with my kids. It didn't start at a house. I was like, we could run a marathon together, or we could go climb a mountain. It was always together. I didn't want like a solo eat, pray, love, hike the Appalachian Trail thing, right? Like, first of all, I didn't have anything to do with my kids. I still had a job. I was writing software the whole time we were building the house. They had school. So I wanted to do something with them, and I hate running. Like, that is not fun for me.
Yeah, I never understood it either.
No, yeah, I can do it if I have to, but it's not enjoyable to me in any way. And like climbing a mountain, what would we have? What would we have? Like a photo of us at the top of a mountain? Like what? I needed tangible. I needed things I could touch. And we are very tactile as human beings. And so much of our work is now like, it's keyboard, it's digital, it's not things that we can feel and see at the end of the day. How many times in your life have you created something that's bigger than you, physically bigger than you? Like putting that sideboard together, like that was it. Building even just assembling a single piece of furniture, the way that we take ownership for that. And they've done a bunch of psychological studies, and you value something, even if you've just done minor putting it together or repainting it, you value it at a minimum of 60% higher financial value than you would if it was something you just purchased. It has more value to you, that hands-on work.
Interesting. That does make sense.
It's called the IKEA effect,
right?
Funnily enough,
right? Because people keep going back.
Yeah, and we have a higher attachment to those things. Our blood, sweat, and tears are in it. Sometimes, literally.
Who would have thought a pen company could make such a difference while destroying most of Romania's forestry?
Oh no!
Well done, IKEA. Well done.
They are not our sponsor in this
They are
episode.
not
I'm
a
not
sponsor.
saying you should build something from IKEA, but
No.
you should build something. You should make something. You should, and
Yeah.
you know, I have a big thing about when you set a goal. You should have some tangible object in your home that reflects what that goal is. Now, the goal itself may not be tangible, right? Like it may be a piece of software you're developing. It may be, you know, a book you're writing where you're just sitting and typing all day. But what are the like physical representations of that goal that you can place around your house? You can buy a statue, you can buy a picture, or you can paint a picture. And this is where like making vision boards, why that became so popular for a while. And for me, when we started building the house, one of the first things I did was name it. I don't know why we name things in my family, but we do. Like we name our trees, and you know, random objects have names. Lots of our tools had names, but they were names like Billy, you know, not like not like the reciprocating saw. It's Billy, hand me Billy. But we named the house Inkwell Manor because it was the place I wanted to write. You know, it was the inkwell from which all of my future books would write. And that's why I'm sitting in a library right now in that house. You know, so that the idea behind like having a physical representation of what I wanted to do, remember, I didn't want to build houses. That wasn't my goal. My goal at that time was to write books. So I made this massive concrete sign that we made ourselves. My dad helped me make it. It says Inkwell Manor, and it sits in front of my house propped on a tree. So I can never lose sight of what my goal is, right? If I leave the house, I come back to the house, neighbors walk by and they're like, what is Inkwell Manor? I have to say it out loud. Well, this is my goal. This is what I'm doing. Like I can't escape it. And people, once they ask you questions about your goal, because you have that physical representation, they will help you reach it.
Makes sense.
That's
I love
powerful.
that. I agree. I know you've said for our listeners, you know, a lot of people are risk adverse, right? Don't necessarily want to take a risk. And I know you've said you would have preferred to take risks sooner and earlier and more of them. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What would you have done differently? How many more risks would you have taken? How soon would you have done it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you how I arrived at that, and then I'll tell you some of the risks. So when the kids and I are building the house, remember, we know how to do nothing. I do not know how to do a single part of this process. So every day we show up here and we know the thing in front of us, we don't know how to do. And sometimes it's really complicated. There's a lot of math involved, and my family, the whole family, is terrible at math. I mean, bad. So behind the sheetrock, in every wall in this house is like bad math and bad geometry as we try to figure it out over and over again. So there were so many times that would paralyze us, you know, that kind of analysis paralysis of I have to know how to do every step of this before I start, or I might do it wrong. So I started really early on when we're like still swirling our toes in sawdust out here. Whenever I saw everybody like freeze up and no one wants to make a move, I would ask, what's your worst case scenario? What's the worst case scenario if I try to build this diagonal wall and I do it wrong? And the first couple of times I asked, Drew, my son, who was 15 at the time, is like, an airplane engine could fall out of the sky and crush us, you know? And Jada, who's 11 when we built the house, is like, you could cut off your left arm, you know? And so very quickly, we got to this pattern of like, what's the actual most likely worst case scenario? Like if it is cut off your left arm, then learn to safely use the tools first, you know, airplane engine, probably not going to happen. So 99% of the time, the worst case scenario was we'd have to take it apart and do it over again. Right? Like that's it. That's the worst case scenario. And I'd say, whatever the scenario was, can you live with that? Can you live with that worst case scenario? And the kids are like, we did that 12 times yesterday and 6 today already. And I'm like, then hand me a board. I'll make the first cut. I'll nail it together. Like if for whatever reason we can't use it, we're going to make use of it on the next wall or the wall after that, because we saved everything in like these little piles, you know, saved by length and board type, so we could reuse them. So, you know, we just use that over and over again. And we found like so quickly how quickly we changed from that stand around to like every project. When we got there, we already knew the worst case scenario. We could live with that. Hand me that board. I'll make the first cut. And this carried on with us until like after we had finished building the house. My oldest son, Drew, wanted to go to college up in Fairbanks, Alaska. the night before he left, he decided he was not going. Like his bags are packed, his flight's in the morning, and he's like, absolutely not. I'm not going. And I'm like, well, what's your worst case scenario? And he said, what if I get up there and I hate it? I'm like, okay, what will you do? And he said, I guess I'll have to come back home. And I said, you live at home now. You are literally living your worst case scenario. Go do something different. And what I found in life, I swear 95% of the time, the thing that holds us back, if we carry that thought through and say, what's our worst case scenario? We are accepting living what we consider our worst case scenario rather than trying the thing. You know, I want to, one of my kids wants to ask somebody out on a date. Well, what if they say no? Well, then you won't have a date on Friday night. You don't have a date on Friday night now. Are you willing to live your worst case scenario rather than take the small risk? I mean, we learned that. It was reinforced every single day out here. It's been reinforced every single day since, from getting up on stages, writing books, doing TV shows and talk shows and interviews, and at a really high and frightening level. You know, it was just reinforced again and again. So if I could go back and say, what risks would you take earlier? Oh my goodness, I would have quit the day job so much sooner and gone in full time with what I love to do, which is the writing, which is the speaking, which is the storytelling. And yeah, a dozen other different business ideas that I've had over the years that I was like, well, you know, what if it doesn't work? I chose to live my worst case scenario rather than take that small risk. That worst case would have landed me right back where I was. So yeah, 1,000 times over, I'd take that risk.
Love that. That's incredibly powerful. Your story, I mean, you mentioned it yourself when you talked about, you know, being on TV shows and doing this and doing talks, and your story has garnered over 2 billion media impressions. Now, for those that are listening, I did not stutter. I said a billion with a B. And for reference, for those people like me who aren't very good at numbers, if you call someone right now 1 million seconds ago, that's only 12 years. If you call someone now 1 billion seconds ago, that's 37 years. 1 billion is a lot, right? How has this platform transformed your approach to creating value? And what insights can you share about building a personal brand from unexpected life experiences?
Yeah, I didn't see that coming. And that was 2 billion in 12 months.
Wow.
At which point we stopped paying for tracking software because we figured, hey, if we can say 2 billion, like that's probably good. And tracking software is expensive. So like, let's just stick with that. 2 billion in 12 months is what we got. It was massive around the globe and completely unexpected. And, you know, I think that it probably the main thing that it taught me is to dream bigger. You know, I spent 6 years writing this memoir because an agent in New York asked me to. I was a fiction writer at the time. And I spent 6 years writing it. And the whole time I'm thinking, yeah, like 4 people and my dad are going to read it, you know, because memoirs are tough. Like either they hit or they don't. And I did a weird thing and I did it with children. And how is that going to be perceived? And it's a tough story to tell because there is like some, you know, graphic domestic violence and difficult things that we went through. And how do you structure that? And, you know, I went through all of this drama over how I would do it when I probably could have done it much more quickly, which we've already established. Taking that risk quicker and throwing it out there is like one of my big lessons. And I could have dreamed so much bigger and been ready for it. It got 2 billion hits at a time when there was nothing on my website for anybody to do with that. It did not say I would speak at your conference. There was my website was like about writing fiction, you know, and also I wrote this one memoir, you know, it went viral before the book came out. 2 weeks before the book came out is when the story went viral. So I didn't even have a book people could buy when it started, you know, I wasn't prepared for success. And dang, shouldn't we be more prepared for success? If we say that's what we want, if we would personally, you know, take a walk and fantasize and dream about being wildly successful, shouldn't our platform, shouldn't our business and our website be prepared to handle the highest possible level of success we can dream of? Yeah, it should. And I was not. Wow. But I am now. I'm ready for it now, right?
That's awesome. Getting back to what you said before, the worst case scenario, check in with your kids. That's such an intriguing concept. So, what was the most surprising thing that you learned from that exercise?
I think that the most surprising thing was to pay closer attention to my kids. And that doesn't just go with your kids. That's your team members, to your coworkers, to your family members, to pay closer attention to the details when you ask somebody a question like that. First of all, be plugged in enough to ask them. And then really listen to what their fears are. If we can understand what somebody fears the most, it's not just the not having a date, right? Like that we can say, you wouldn't have a date on Friday, and we can kind of laugh at that. But like there's a deeper fear of being alone, of being outcast, of not being part of a tribe, of not being apart. There's a deeper fear that they're expressing. And I think like being truly plugged in first enough to ask the question and then enough to truly listen to the answer and try to explore so that you can be more supportive all the way around. Not just more supportive about, go ask for the date or go get on that plane and go to Alaska. But what were the fears and how can you in other ways that have nothing to do with the current situation? How can you in other ways build that person up and support them? And that's how you create a team. And that again, like it's great for your kids and for your family or for your partner, but imagine that in a corporate setting.
If you're right, able it applies to everyday life.
Yes.
And in work for everything.
Yeah.
Love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you speak very eloquently, by the way, and there's so much passion behind your words that.
Oh, I feel it. I believe it.
Yeah.
It's my life. Yeah.
It's incredible.
And it changed, my kids, when we built the house, my oldest was 17. I had a 17-year-old daughter, a 15-year-old son, an 11-year-old daughter, and a 2-year-old son. So we had a toddler on the construction site the entire time we're building. So you can imagine the fears that brings. If you've ever been around a 2-year-old, the fear and the level of insecurity that you feel and the way that people are looking at you, somebody's coming to drop off some shingles and they're watching a naked 2-year-old streak across the job site and your 15-year-old's got a nail gun up on a ladder, singing whatever the crazy popular songs are at the time at the top of his lungs. It's all very strange. And, and there's just a lot of, I think, emotion and passion that has to go into a project like that to stick with it. You have to really believe in it, and I did. I really believed in the project and I really believe in the things that we learned from it. I believe them all the way through.
And I love that you didn't let anyone's judgment get in the way. Because people can be very judgy, especially when you have children doing labor. See, when I grew up, my dad was banging on our doors at 6 a.m. on a Saturday saying, "Get up, you're coming to help me today." So we were put to work at a very early age. And I think, it made us the hard workers that we are today. But, it could also be child abuse in my house. But no, it did teach us to have a really strong work ethic. And I think that's super important that you didn't let the judgments or anything get in the way of the goal.
Yeah. And certainly I grew up the same way. My dad is like, go. And he would make up. If there was no work to be done, he would make it up because he didn't like us to sit still, right? Like, go do something, go haul, go dig rocks out of the ditch. We did that. We had a huge pile of rocks that we would just dig out of the ditch. There's no purpose, but we were busy. So I grew up that same way. And I grew up with my kids always helping. And I think because I was so much of a solo parent, even during the time that I was married, I was a solo parent, that there's a lot of them and one of me, So I expected a really high level of involvement from my children at a very young age. And it was very much a teamwork kind of a scenario, even if it was just, cleaning on Sunday afternoon before the week starts or whatever. It was always all hands on deck. We did projects together. We did art projects together. We were a very hands-on family. But yeah, writing the book and anticipating the release of the book, that was my greatest fear, is how will this be judged? How will this be perceived? Because this is a pretty radical move especially for a mom. Like if a dad made the move, it would be perceived differently than if a mom made the move and did this physical work. So yeah, I was worried about it. I didn't know how it would be perceived. It was tough. It was a really tough couple of years. When you go through, the book was published, it sold in a big auction in New York, which was really unexpected too, and should have had me anticipating a bit more success than I did. But then it's like 2 years after you sell the book before it actually hits the shelves, right? So you have a long time to sit there and stress about it. And yeah, that was 2 years of wondering, like, oh, am I going to have to like go dark underground after this? Am I canceled? Before that was even a word. But that's, yeah, it's a tough thing. We worry. We want to be part of the tribe, right? Like that's a really primitive feeling that we want to be connected. We don't want to be outcast. We don't want to be judged harshly and found wanting, But there was something very freeing also in the writing. And people say writing a memoir is cathartic and all that. Like you don't feel that when you're writing at all. It's horrible. It's hard. It's one of the most difficult things that you ever do, to have this really high level of self-awareness that you can write about yourself and judge yourself and say, like, here are some of the really bad mistakes I made and how they hurt my family. Wow. And here's this thing we tried to do to make it better. And there's a real level of vulnerability that you have to have, and self-understanding that you have to have, and security that you have to do that. And then when it comes down to it and you're putting it all out there, and like people are going to be sitting alone in their house and reading this, or driving down the road and listening to it, there's a certain level of freedom in this. I never again in my life have to worry, what if they knew? What, I met somebody and they seem nice and they seem to like me and we're getting along, but what if they knew? And now it's like, here it is. Like, here is the good and the bad of me. Here are the tough things that I have done or survived or whatever. And like, take them or leave them.
And to relive that trauma. And I truly believe that resonates, because so many women are in abusive relationships, or some form of one. And when you have a stalker, because I've actually been in that situation, a stalker who follows you from place to place and makes your life a living hell for years. Yeah. It is so hard to reverse that trauma. And not only did you do that, but you accomplished something so amazing, and you did it with your kids. I just think it's so inspiring, and it literally has inspired me to just build furniture. Good. Which brings me to my question of, you had mentioned, I want to get a little wisdom in here, that big goals are easier to reach than small goals. And I'm like, let me just start with building a couple of things. So why do you think that? And how have you achieved the bigger things as opposed to, not that you're not achieving the smaller ones, but what was your reasoning for that?
Yeah. Oh, and it believe it or not, it is so true. Big goals are so much easier. And there's a couple of reasons. And I came to this conclusion just before I started building the house. Like, I was in a bad place, right? Like psychologically, emotionally, self-esteem, I was low. And I kept looking for answers. I'm looking online, I'm looking in books, and it's like, just get out of bed today. Just make sure you put on your socks. Get up, brew a cup of coffee. Like, if that's all you can handle today, call that like a win. And it was this baby steps mentality. And like, I was doing that. I was doing the baby steps and I was not feeling any better, right? I was feeling like baby step better. And I thought, I don't want to crawl along for 20 years taking baby steps. My kids are going to go to college. They are going to leave home, and they are never going to want to come back. What do they have to come back to? We've had this trauma. What are we going to have? Some tiny house that we're trying to fix up that's a piece of junk. What do we have that they're going to want to come back to? What kind of a connection, what kind of emotional connection do we have that they're going to want to return for? I need to do something. I need to do something big. And that means I need to do something fast. And you know what happens when you imagine, boy, by the end of the day, I'm going to have warm socks and a pot of coffee, versus 9 months from now, I'm going to have a brand new house. I am not going to have a mortgage. I am going to live in this house possibly for the rest of my life. My kids are going to want to come home to it because they have built it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see like immediately the difference in the way a big goal feels. Small goals are not very motivating. They're not very inspiring. And how hard are you going to work to achieve it? And if you can achieve it in a day or a week, how involved did you really have to get in it? How hands-on did you have to get? How much did you struggle or work to get there? But if it's something that you set that's big enough that you're going to have to work hard for, that you're going to set a tight deadline for, you're going to have to reach out to other people to help you because you cannot do it alone. It's that big. Already you feel it in your gut how much more inspiring that is. Big goals are easier to reach because we're more likely to keep going until we get to them. The little things are just, especially if you give yourself a long deadline. People I meet who want to write a memoir, I meet them at a conference and they're like, I've always wanted to write a memoir. I'm going to start writing it right now. And I like see them 2 years later. 2 years later, and they're like, yeah, I think I have a cover that I want for it. And I'm like, how many words are on the paper? Like, set the deadline. 6 months from now, I'll have a first draft. Make yourself stay up late and get up early to reach it. Have a physical goal, a statue of yourself. I don't care what it is that you're going to bump into every day to remind you, oh yeah, I'm a writer writing about myself. Whatever the thing is, like, make it big and unavoidable.
I love that advice because I think it's the exact opposite of what everybody else says.
Yes, like this whole baby steps idea. And I don't want to discount, like, there are times when the baby steps count, and I think health and fitness goals are one place where you have to set the big fitness goal and go for the big thing and do the hard workout. But the small things matter, like saying no to the donut, saying yes to the stairs. Like, those small things do matter and add up. And there are times for every single one of us when brewing the pot of coffee and wearing the fuzzy socks is like, it's okay if that day you can't stay in that place, but it's okay to give yourself that. Those, figure out what your dopamine wins are. What gives you dopamine, that chemical release that makes you feel like you accomplished something, and save those easy dopamine wins for the really hard times. Things like play a video game on your phone. When you play a video game on your phone, when you achieve a level or accomplish something on your phone, I don't care what the game is, you get a hit of dopamine. And it's the same hit of dopamine you get when you finish building that piece of furniture. It's cheaper and easier on the phone, so we go to the phone. Now, it doesn't mean we should eliminate the video game, but know when you need the cheap and easy hit because you don't have it in you to do the other. And you can use it to inspire and build and keep that mood up at a time when you're really tough, but don't cheat. And on a Saturday morning, when you could and should get up and build the piece of furniture or do whatever the thing is, go for the run, don't pick up the phone and get the cheap and easy hit, because then your brain is done and it doesn't need it anymore. It already got it.
I remember reading Ernest Hemingway, who once said, "The coward dies 1,000 deaths, but brave die but once." For those people out there, if I've misquoted, I apologize in advance. But I think this idea of easing into a cold ocean, that every inch is excruciating, but if you dive in, yes, it sucks big time, but then it's over.
Yeah.
It's far worse to turn away from what scares you, because when you do, I think deep inside, a little piece of you withers and dies. And you question yourself more and more with every action that follows that one action that you took that one time.
Yeah, there were 1,000 different things. And after I built the house, I went back to the office and wrote computer software for 10 years after that.
Wow.
I didn't plan to be a speaker. I didn't plan to completely change careers. I thought, maybe I'll write some more fiction books is what I thought. But this was a career that kept pulling me in because people kept calling saying, hey, will you speak at this conference? Will you come do this talk show? All these people pulling me, and I could have said no to every one of them. And my gut inclination was to say no because those were scary things that felt completely outside of my personality. Again, I was a software developer and a fiction writer. Can you get more off the stage than that? right? Like that is a behind the scenes girl, 1000%.
I don't know about that because you're writing stories. You've already understand
Right.
narration. You already know how to get a point across. You already know that things have to have an arc and a hero structure and a journey, and you understand how to speak in a way that people can understand and share. So I don't feel like you're that. I mean, if you had said you were a bricklayer in a foreign country, I'd be like, okay, big jump, big jump.
Agree. No, I totally agree for the mechanics of it, right?
Yes.
Like for the background work is all there, but the actual act of stepping in front of the TV cameras, the act of stepping on the stage. When I got up in oral comm in high school and in college, and I cried every time. Like that's how far off the stage and not wanting to be in front of people I was.
Yeah.
So the first time somebody calls and is like, hey, we'll give you a whole bunch of money to go kick off this conference, I'm like, everything in me is screaming, you can't do that. And my own children are like, no, that is not something you should probably do. You are not the get in front of a crowd kind of a person, right? And I was like, yeah, I'll try that. And I was not very good. I mean, I got up and told a big conference full of young men how I wrote a memoir. That's not what they were expecting to hear. It was from my heart and it was authentic, but it was not good conference material, which I figured out very quickly. But you know, I already had an event lined up for the next week and the week after that, and then the next week. So I could keep trying stuff just like I did on the house. I could cut it apart. I could, you know, listen to the excruciating thing I just did, tear it to pieces with that same self-awareness that I wrote the memoir with, right? Like be self-aware. It's okay to be critical and fix it. Figure out how to do this better. And that's what I did. And then pretty soon you're like exactly what you just pointed out, the storytelling, the connecting, the being able to say the things that matter, that are important, that we learned, that I feel like fit not only for you at home with your family or your partner, but dang, the way these could be used in a corporate environment. It's beautiful and it's exciting and it's fun to have that connection. And yeah, it wouldn't change anything. But guess how many times I had to say yes, where I was so afraid to say yes before I said yes because I wanted it. Like it was a lot of times. Same with the, you know, TV shows, talk shows. Like I'm on talk shows with a lot of celebrities, like Harry Connick Jr. show and stuff. And there's a bunch of people on these shows and like they're looking, or the Hallmark Channel does a home and family show. And there's a lot of celebrities on it at once. And then there's me and I don't know what I'm doing at all. And they're all like looking to this camera and looking to that camera. And I'm like, how do you know? What are you doing? What, I'm looking the wrong place every time. My feet are all weird on the stage. You know, like I don't know what I'm doing. But then I can watch that after and go, oh, like, I think maybe here's some cues I could have picked up on, and here's a better way to sit on a stage. And, you know, I just kept saying yes. Saying yes. And I could be sitting here. I could still be going to the job every day, writing computer code, and my life would be fine. And I would have stayed in my comfort zone. But my life would be very, very small.
According to most studies, people's number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death, right? Yeah. Death is number two. I mean, that means that the average person would rather be dead than standing at the front of the room and speak about the person who's dead.
I get it.
That was me. Yeah, that was me.
Crazy.
And now I'm like, oh yeah, give me another stage. I can't wait.
I can attest now, having had you for one of my client events, I have to say your talk was one of the best, if not the best, literally the best story of all. And I've been in business 10 years now.
That's incredible. So we've got an ending, which is our rapid fire questions. I want you just to think quickly. I'm going to encourage spontaneity, honest responses. Just tell us what you feel, or the first thing that you think when you ask the question. First question. What is one tool from your house building project that serves as a metaphor for your life?
A tool?
A tool.
Is it a tool?
A tool.
Okay.
A tool.
I'll tell you as quickly as possible. It's called a ramset nailer. Okay. This is a tool that you use to drive a nail into concrete.
Oh, I've seen those in horror movies, so normally killing young virgins.
Okay. So you put a 22 like bullet into it.
Wow.
And you put a nail in the bottom of it. And then you take a hammer and you willingly and intentionally have to whack that with the hammer, knowing in your hand is this 22 bullet that's going to shoot through the ramset nailer and drive that nail into the concrete. And is no more terrifying tool. There are a lot more dangerous tools on a construction site, but there's nothing that scared me more. And that idea of how many things in life that we have to go into knowing, like, we have to hold this thing in our hand that we know is difficult, that we know is scary, that we know is potentially dangerous for us. And we have to willingly and intentionally take that hammer and yell fire in the hole so everybody covers their ears. And we have to smack it.
Incredible.
Yeah, that's the tool. That's the tool.
If your YouTube search history from the construction period could talk, what would it say about you?
Oh, gosh. I think that it would express a lot of uncertainty because I didn't search for like one video on how to set a foundation block. There were 97. Like, are you sure that's how? Like, really, is there another way? Are you sure? So it would, especially very early on, would have expressed a lot of uncertainty about what I was doing, but the determination to do the 97 searches until I felt confident enough to do it.
Complete this sentence. Building a house was easier than...
Writing a book about building the house.
Oh, that's really good.
Good one.
I'd like you to give our listeners some sort of relatable glimpse into the day-to-day life of someone like you, someone that is doing all these incredible projects while still being an incredible human.
Oh, gosh. The day-to-day is tough because there's too many projects.
Wow.
Because I am a creative person and there's a lot of projects. So there is like an ottoman I'm trying to build. There's a needlepoint project. There's a quilting project. There is the next travel, like the list of all, the travel that's like right here.
Oh my gosh.
So I work a lot with like highlighters so that I can
love a good highlighter.
So that I can prioritize the list. Because life is short and there's a lot of things I want to do and there's a lot of things I enjoy doing. And I want to try to balance like those things. This is what I enjoy doing that doesn't necessarily affect my business in any way, but I love it. And also here are the things that I need to do for business and family.
Brilliant.
Love that.
Absolutely brilliant. I personally don't believe life is short, by the way. I think it's short if you're doing the wrong things. I think if you're enjoying every moment of every day, then life is pretty long and it expands to what you need.
Oh, I like it.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I can only thank you. Obviously, I've got to thank Alicia for making this possible. I've got to thank our sponsors, who you'll hear about at the end of this episode, for making all of this possible. But I don't think we've done an episode that has so many standalone, perfect moments of wisdom and knowledge, and every single one of them with such heart and grace and fortitude of someone that's lived it in such a way that they can now explain it so that when we hear it, we can act against it and share it ourselves.
Thank you. You gave a lot back too. And now I know life is long, especially. So here I am.
Exactly. And this is from a man who got shot by a
More
22.
projects.
Thank you so much, Cara.
Thank
This
you.
is truly just amazing.
Truly. If you've enjoyed this show, please go check her out. Her details will be in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, of course, it's in the description box just below. Make sure to subscribe, hit that, all the stuff. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. If you don't know how to use YouTube, then don't even try and build a house. Start with understanding that you need to subscribe because it helps the algorithm. You need to say a word because it helps Apple show that you care, because it shows us that we're bringing you true value. And I think the thing that means more to myself and Alicia than being great storytellers is being people who bring value to the world. And that's why we bring you people like Cara and many more. Oh, and that is our sign that Alicia hasn't taken off her notifications.
I did, and I don't know why it keeps doing it. It's on Do Not Disturb.
Thank you so much, whoever you are. We're out.
If you love this episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss your weekly fix. New episodes are released every Wednesday. And if you think this podcast could help someone in your life build their own rich life recipe, please make sure to share this with them too.
Hi, I'm Jason Onscott. You may recognize me from such podcasts as, well, the one you were just listening to. I've done a bunch of podcasts. In fact, I'm the first person ever to not sell one show, but sell two. To find over 20 ways to promote a show, to get more listeners. I've also found over 30 ways to make money from my podcast. It was at this stage that so many people came to me and asked me one question. How? How do you make money from a podcast? Which blew my mind because I kind of accepted that everyone was making money from a podcast, or why were they starting a podcast? But here's the trick. There's a formula that I found out back in 2015, and I've tested on people over and over and over again. To finally finding out that there's one recipe, just like the Rich Life recipe, a recipe to success. For the first time ever, we have a course that has everything in it. How to start a podcast, how to grow a podcast, how to promote a podcast, and how to profit from a podcast. I've done it in multiple podcast types, from lifestyle, to business, to financial, to crypto. So this is your chance. And because you've come this far, I'd love to give you a gift. If you use the coupon code LISTENER, you will get 20% off. What I'd love you to do is go to the link podcastingforbusiness.co and open the gate and meet me on the other side.